Okay. I apologize again for the delay. It just takes me a while to get through all my technical issues, but I apologize. Since we have a new recording, I'm going to state for the record, my name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resources Control Board's Administrative Hearings Office. Today is December 8, 2022. And it's just after 2 p.m. And this is the hearing by the Administrative Hearings Office in the court's reference to the State Water Resources Control Board in the City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar case. Appearances appear to be the same as this morning, so we don't need to go over those again. And I do say we are short-staffed. My office is short-staffed today, and we will need to take a break between 2:45 and 3. So our afternoon break will be a little earlier than usual. But with that, let's just go ahead and get started. Mr. Osias, you were cross-examining Dr. Kincaid, so please continue. And Dr. K, just a reminder, you still are under oath.
Mr. Lilly, yes. Before we start, if I can really quick.
Okay.
Over the lunch break, Dr. Kincaid was going over his slides and checking some of his work. And I think he would like to correct some of the information in one of his slides, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. So, Dr. Kincaid, do you want us to post the slide so you can refer to it when you say what you're going to say?
Yes, sir. From my hearing slides,
Do you have an
which I
exhibit
believe
number?
is
So this is exhibit MCWD 117, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Bouchard?
118.
one. I believe it's 118.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you. So let's post exhibit MCWD 118 and what slide number?
20.
Slide 20.
Okay, slide 20. And go ahead and tell me or tell us what your correction or change is.
The correction is the label on the map says layer 580-foot aquifer. And okay. We change it either way, but this the numbers, the quantities that are described in the bullets for scenarios 3 and 6, the acre feet per year numbers, they refer to the combination of layers 2 and 5. So the title, if we keep the bullets the same, the layer title in the slide should read layers 2 and 5, upper dune sand aquifer and 180-foot aquifer.
Okay, well, that's a pretty important clarification.
Yes.
So I'm glad you let us know.
And where does the combined go? I just didn't follow the correction. Other than the layer saying 2 and 5, you said something about bullets.
Well, if you in the bullets where it says the inflow from the ocean, and it describes how it changes as a consequence of pumping. Okay. So for scenario 3 and scenario 6,
yes,
those numbers relate to the combination of layers 2 and 5.
Okay, so as I understand it, Dr. Kincaid, you are proposing to just change the title in the figure where it says layer 5. You want to change that to read combined layers 2 and 5. And then where it says 180-foot aquifer, you want to change that to read upper dune sand aquifer and 180-foot aquifer. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm prepared to do either one. I have the numbers now in front of me. So we can leave it. We have to change one or the other, the acre feet per year numbers or the title. It's obviously be easier to change the title.
Okay, well, let's just do that then.
Okay.
And what I ask is, you don't have to do it right away, but if you can do it soon, like tonight, just submit, and you can work with Mr. Bouchard to do this. Mr. Bouchard, work with Dr. Kincaid to prepare an exhibit, which we will call Exhibit MWD 118, slide 20, space revised, and then just submit the revised slide. I want the record to have both the original slide, which will remain part of exhibit MCWD 118, and then this new exhibit, will be the revised version of just that slide, but then we will have that in the record as well. And of course, we haven't gotten to the point of offering these exhibits into evidence, but when we get there, you or one of your colleagues can offer both MCWD and MCWD 118 slide 20 revised into evidence. And of course, Callahan can object and we'll go from there. But I think that'll be the way to have the record be the clearest.
I can do that. I will do that. I would also like in the record just the numbers of the acre feet per year in layer 5 as well.
Okay, you mean just in layer 5?
Yeah, so in other words, as the slide reads, is depicted, we'll change the title so that it's correct. But then also I'd like to do another one for layer 5 to show what the changes in the 180-foot aquifer would be. Okay,
so why don't you call that a separate exhibit and call that exhibit MCWD 118, comma, slide 20, comma, further revisions. And then you can work with Dr. Kincaid to change the numbers in the third bullet point, and probably you should also work with him to change that text at that third bullet point. So it says something like inflow from ocean outside capture zone into layer 5 or something. So it's clear what we're talking about, but then we can have it on the record both ways. You of course can offer those. Mr. Osias or one of his colleagues can object if they think they should. And Dr. Kincaid, make sure to stick around because we are going to have you authenticate these revised exhibits after we have them in our record. Just so
yes, sir.
Clear. I mean, I can't quite have you testify under oath to authenticate an exhibit before it is in our record.
I understand.
I don't want to do that. So we'll do that going forward. Of course, Callahan can object if they think they want to, but my goal, of course, in all of this is to have accurate information. So I appreciate your letting me know about this so we can update it and make it accurate.
Yes, sir. And I apologize for this confusion.
Well, I'll just say if it makes you feel any better with complex technical matters like this does happen. And I realize there's a lot to process. So I'd rather you catch it now than later. So with that,
Mr. Lilly,
go
yes.
ahead. You want to say something about this or are you ready to proceed?
Yes. No, I wanted to say something about this and not have the clock start.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Clock's not starting. Go ahead.
And I'm going to lay the foundation for my request, which is this is not a summary of his written testimony or his technical report. And we got it, and now it's being modified. Take that as the basis of my next request. We don't have what my former math and science teachers would always say, which is show your work. We have only the slide. And he obviously did work, to calculate this or model it or something, and then looked at it again and made the corrections he just told us about. Could we ask that you advise MCWD that Dr. Kincaid should share his work that shows how he calculated this and all, because it's after our subpoena date for his depot.
Yeah, I understand. This is a valid point. So there are two possible ways, and I certainly have no doubt that Dr. Kincaid is doing the best he can here, but this is complicated, and you certainly have a right to review this. So, Mr. Brochard, there are two. I'm going to.
Okay.
Okay, it's not just me.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Lilly's frozen in my screen. Is that true for everybody?
Yeah, it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, am I back now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I usually have a good internet connection, but anyway, it says here my internet connection is unstable. I hope it'll stabilize. Can you hear me all now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so two options. I think I was starting to say two options for Mr. Brochard. Number one, which we'll just label as another exhibit, another MCWD exhibit, which basically shows the work, because I think that's a valid point by Mr. Osias that explains what he did to get these numbers in both this slide and the revised slide that he's going to prepare. That's probably the best way to do that. And then he can authenticate that. Hopefully, if there's cross-X, it'll be very short and we can go forward. So let's plan to do that. The alternative would be to have another short deposition, but boy, I'd rather not do that. Number one, because it's a lot less efficient. And number two, because I don't end up with nearly as good of a record on this work. So
you cut out on option 1.
Oh, shoot.
Sorry.
Okay. I'll try one more time. I didn't get a message that time. So Mr. Bouchard, option 1 is for Dr. Kincaid to prepare a memorandum which explains how he calculated the numbers in both this slide and the revised slide he's preparing. And then we'll have him authenticate that memorandum and be subject to short cross-examination just on that. Option 2 would be to have him available for another deposition, which I don't really prefer because I don't get as good of a record and it's a lot more time consuming and less efficient for all of you. So are you okay with doing option 1?
Yes.
All right. And let's try to have you do that. So if we come back, I want you to do that tonight. This should be very quick. So, and submit that before, I'll say before 8:45 tomorrow morning. Just email it to the AHO with CCs to the service list, and we'll cover that first thing tomorrow morning. And maybe, depending on what else we have to cover. So will that work for you, Mr. Bouchard?
Well, I'm not going to be the one preparing the memorandum. So Dr. Kincaid, is that enough time?
Yes, that's fine.
I mean, I'm hoping this memorandum is about 2 to 3 pages long max. So, okay.
Yes, that's
All
fine.
right.
And then,
So-
Mr. Lilly, not just to be sure, a memorandum describing what he did to do this is helpful. But if he, for example, used an Excel spreadsheet, rather than having him send us a picture of it, if it came with live cells so we could see his formulas or his math.
Okay.
I assume that's what he did to calculate something.
Yes, it is, and that's fine. with
Okay.
me.
So just do that, work with Mr. Bouchard, have your Excel spreadsheet be labeled as a separate exhibit from your memorandum.
Will do.
And then we normally have our exhibits in PDF, but when necessary, we can have exhibits in Excel format. And this will be a case where we will do that. And then, Mr. Osias, that should open it up for your expert witnesses to review that as necessary. I mean, this is a pretty important topic, so I certainly want that in there so that they can review it and respond as they deem appropriate.
Thank you.
Or as you deem appropriate. So, okay, thank you very much. It's an inconvenience, but I'd rather you let me know now than later because we can deal with this pretty promptly at this point. So with that, Mr. Osias, your clock has not started running, but now it will.
Well, don't take it down, staff, please. Because coincidentally, I just wanted to go to page 22. And that's where I was going to start.
Okay, so we will now start. I'm just going to make a note of this. Kincaid will prepare slides, 2 supplemental slides, a memo, and a spreadsheet. And I told you, Mr. Bouchard, how to label them as exhibits. And with that, we now have exhibit MCWD 118, slide 22 on the screen, and I'll start your clock running. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Mr. Osias, and say we're starting at 2:20 p.m. So go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure that this work of Dr. Kincaid was in his mind when I start asking him some questions. The illustrations are primarily useful to me for forming my questions. So
It's very helpful for me too to have the illustrations up here, so that's fine. Please go ahead.
And so this is all relatively fresh in your head, correct, Dr. Kincaid?
Yes.
Okay. And then for simplicity's sake, I think I took you from that page to Cal-Am number 4, which I'd ask to go back to just because it reduces some of the noise on the page.
Okay, so let's have it. We can flip back and forth between those 2 exhibits fairly readily. So I'll ask my staff to post exhibit Cal-Am 4 just so Dr. Kincaid can remember what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I was gonna go to slide 13 on that, which I
Okay.
talked to him about yesterday.
Yes, I do remember that. So we will now post exhibit CalAm 4, slide 13. This, unfortunately, these big files take a little while to load. But let's go to slide 4. Okay, so we now have that on the
Right.
screen. So go ahead with your question, Mr.
So
Asai.
thank you. And in both slides, illustrated is a aquifer above the FO/SVA aquitard, correct?
Yes,
And there is such an aquifer in the real world. It's not just a conceptualized idea.
that's correct.
And it goes by various names, if you know, because in different locations, some call it perched or mounded, some call it aquifer A. Does that sound correct?
Yes, it sounds correct.
Okay. And in CalAm's exhibit, it shows above the aquitard a seaward gradient by the arrow flowing from right to left, correct?
Yes,
And that's the same in your illustration of that aquifer also, correct?
yes,
So there seems to be agreement that that's a seaward gradient.
yes.
And isn't it correct that the slope of that gradient is highly influenced by the slope of the aquitard?
I would presume so, yes.
Are you aware of any pumping in the extractive pumping? I'm asking in the perched or mounded aquifer.
I am not aware of any pumping. No.
Okay, and then both conceptual illustrations show the aquitard. That's the FO/SVA aquitard, ending before the depiction of the ocean or Monterey Bay, correct?
Yes.
And there seems to be consensus that in the real world, that also happens.
Yes, I believe there's some disagreement about the western extent of the FOSVA, and to some that was evaluating the effect of the western extent of the FOSVA was at least in part one of the purposes of why Mr. Weiss's scenario modeling assessments.
But no one had it extending into the ocean, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think it's sort of fundamental to your opinion, and obviously if it's not, you'll tell me, that perched mounded aquifer water flows over that western edge into the dune sand aquifer.
Yes. Well, yes.
Okay. And then in your scenarios, you show it going various places, and here it's maybe not depicted in the same way, but they both show it going over the edge. There seems to be agreement on that.
Yes, I believe there's fairly wide agreement on that.
Okay. I did not see in your testimony an opinion expressed by you about the volume going over that edge. There wasn't any, was there?
No.
And in your technical report, I didn't see you address the volume going over that edge.
I did not.
And just so you know, Mr. Osias,
Yes.
I think what you want to say is flow rate. Because
Okay.
You need a rate, not a volume here, just to be scientifically accurate. I don't know, Dr. Kincaid, isn't it really better to talk about a flow rate here rather than a volume?
It is, sir, and I did not evaluate the flow rate.
Okay, so continue with your questions, Mr. Osias, but I think if you talk about a flow rate, it's going to be scientifically clearer.
That's correct. And my question about volume if I changed it to flow rate, your answer is the same.
Yes.
Okay. And and I apologize for this, Mr. Lee, but I'm so old school, I think of volume and flow rate almost as synonymous because I typically use acre feet per year, which is a flow rate. It's just a calendar flow.
Yeah. Okay, acre feet per year is a flow rate. That's what you're asking about. Go ahead.
Yes. And in your conceptual model, which we can flip back to if you wish to look at it, you don't.
Well, let's go back to slide 22 of exhibit MCWD 118. It'd probably help him. I think it's easier to ask him questions about his slide than about Mr. Leffler's slide.
That's fine. It doesn't show there either, I don't think. I'm just gonna
Okay,
confirm that.
go ahead.
Yes, so there's no flow rate identified for the perched mounded aquifer in your slide deck either, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you review anyone else's work that identified a flow rate of the perch mounded aquifer going off of that edge into the dune sand aquifer?
I've identified I've evaluated the layer flow rates in the models, but I have not evaluated anything specific to this diagram.
So I'm not sure I know how to ask a question about that answer, but let me ask it this way. Did anyone suggest or opine on what the acre feet per year would be flowing seaward from the perched mounded aquifer over the edge of the FOSVA?
I don't remember a reading of a specific flow rate, no.
Okay, can we go to Cal-Am Exhibit 3?
Okay, we will post exhibit Cal-Am 3. And tell us, first of all, scroll down just so we know, if Ms. Mullen, if you can just scroll down a little bit so we know what this is. Okay, this is the written testimony of Peter Leffler. Go ahead and tell us what page you'd like to go to.
PDF page 32, lines 25 to 28.
Okay, we'll get there. Okay, we have it now. Go ahead.
Do you see you see the sentence that starts on line 25 with the words "the maximum"?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, and let's either
I can see you're reading it, so I wanted to ask you to go ahead and take your time and read it. Tell me when you're done.
I'm going to read it out loud to all of us just to help
Okay.
myself and others. The maximum potential contribution of groundwater from the perch mounded aquifer above the FO-SVA, assuming this water does not reverse course after flowing over the western edge of the FO-SVA and flow inland, is approximately 15 to 40 to 75 AFY based on the hydraulic gradient of 0.001 from the Weiss report, parentheses K equals 50 to 10 to 50 feet per day saturated. And let's just scroll to the next page quickly. Thickness of 200 feet and width of 7,800 feet. Okay, so I've read it. Now you can ask your question, Mr. Rosaz. And let's maybe scroll back up, Ms. Mullen, since most of
Well, no, I wanted to finish because
okay.
what you just read talked about assuming there was no reverse flow, and you'll see on line 4 an opinion about what would happen if there is reverse flow.
Okay, so I'll just read that out loud. I'm not going to keep doing this, but for these two, it does seem to help. On line 4 on page 33, it states, should the flow reverse course and flow inland after flowing over the western edge of the FO-SVA, then there would be no contribution, parentheses, or less contribution than cited above, close parentheses, to the water extracted from the proposed Cal-Am wells. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Osias, with your question.
Thank you. So these two sentences read out loud by Mr. Lilly and hopefully read to yourself and thought about have actually to deal with two topics. One is how much comes over the edge, and second, what might happen to it or what happens to it vis-a-vis the capture zone. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the amount that comes over the edge, in the opinion of Mr. Leffler, is 15 to 75 acre feet per year. But what happens to it depends upon which direction it flows, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you don't have an opinion about what the volume is that comes over the edge, correct?
I do not. I have not calculated that. No.
Thank you. We can take this down.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mullen. Go ahead.
And I don't believe you need your illustration, but if you do, just tell us and we'll put it back up. The forward extractive work related to the contamination plume involves the perched aquifer, does it not?
I've said I haven't read those, so I can't agree or disagree there.
I
Okay.
can speak to that if you'd like. It's in my testimony.
Yeah, I guess I'll say, Mr. Osias, it's up to you. If you want to ask about that, you should ask Ms. Nelson, not Dr. Kincaid, or if you want to move on to a different topic, it's your choice.
Well, I wanted to finish with Dr. Kincaid on that topic, and then I'll decide whether I want to go to Ms. Nelson, if that's okay.
Okay, well, he's told you he doesn't know what you just asked him about, but if you want to ask him something else, go ahead and see what he knows.
I will. Thank you. I believe you testified yesterday. Actually, let me ask a foundational question. K, sometimes used in hydrogeologic formulas, is a symbol for conductivity?
For hydraulic conductivity, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to try to use it in that context. And I believe you said yesterday, in connection with impacts on freshwater heads, that the K for the perched aquifer was relevant. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes. Is the K value or conductivity or transmissivity of water in the perch mounted aquifer relevant to your opinion about its influence on the slant well impacts?
It's relevant to my opinion about the model's simulation of that, yes.
And in fact, I think you spent some time identifying what the model used for K values for the perch mounted aquifer, correct?
I did.
Okay. And I just want to confirm, Mr. Lilly, whether Dr. Kincaid knows if any of the work done in connection to the Fort Ord site involved calculating or modeling K values.
You can certainly ask him if he knows.
I do not know. I don't want to presume. If they're like every other hydrogeologic study, I would presume they at least considered evaluation of hydraulic conductivity, yes.
Okay. And do you know if the Coastal Commission staff and Weiss requested the HWG, Hydrofocus, and other technical experts to provide them information on the K value for the perch mounted aquifer in January 2020?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. I want you to tell me, if you would, whether you believe the sentence I'm going to read you is consistent or inconsistent with your opinion about the K value for the perch mounted aquifer. Okay.
Is this a
Okay.
sentence from some exhibit, Mr. Osias?
It's not from an exhibit yet because we're trying to get a quality one to provide you. But
Okay,
it's one sentence, but it's a technical sentence, so I'll read slowly.
go ahead.
And again, I'll just repeat, Dr. Kincaid.
Yes.
My question is whether it's consistent or inconsistent with your opinion about the conductivity. Okay.
Okay.
K values from slug/aquifer tests ranged from 0.07 to 8.5 feet per day, comma. Lab K values ranged from 0.002 to 4.8 feet per day, comma. Modeled K values ranged from 7 to 25 feet per day, comma. And pumping capacities of wells in these two aquifers range from 1.5 GPM to about 10 GPM, period. Are you able to tell us whether you think that's consistent or inconsistent with your opinion?
I believe what you've done is found a subset of the totality of measurements that have been made out there. I can't speak to all of them, but what I have read is that the hydraulic conductivity in the dune sand aquifer tends to be on the order of tens of feet per day. I'm sure and would not be surprised to find heterogeneity within the aquifer where there are smaller hydraulic conductivity zone or smaller values. But it is, I think where you're getting to is, my opinion focuses on the model, and it focuses in this case on the assignment of hydraulic conductivity of 2 feet per day in the zone immediately east of the project area. And these are our assumptions or our calculations, estimations of flow are very highly dependent on hydraulic conductivity. If we go back to Mr. Leffler's testimony, I'm sure we will see that in the phrase that Mr. Lilly read, he specified a hydraulic conductivity there as well.
So at the risk of trying to summarize that, assuming the model said 2 feet per day, you disagree with that, correct?
I tend to agree with Mr. Weiss in that the conductivities of the dune sand aquifer should be higher than 2 feet per day. That was his conclusion from his work. And when I looked at the technical memorandum and when I looked at the model, I can say that the assignment of 2 feet per day has a very significant effect on the simulation of flow. And if you're going to make an assumption about that, then I would say that it needs to be pretty widely supported, not rely simply on 1 or 2 values that are measured someplace, but on a more wide understanding of the dune sand aquifer. After all, it was not assigned on a very specific location. It was assigned over a broad area that very much controls how the model simulates the flow of fresh water into the project area.
So, Dr. Kincaid, I was trying to be very careful in all the questions leading up to that one where I asked about your opinion, and that sentence, we're addressing the perched mounted aquifer. and the K value for that. Now, your last answer, the one you just finished, talked about the dune sand aquifer. Are you using those as synonyms?
Yes, I am. So, and as you pointed out, there have been multiple names for this particular aquifer. In the 2016 version of the model and in the literature I'd read before on the previous models, it was described as the dune sand aquifer. In the 2022 version of the model, they broke that zone into two pieces, described one as the upper perched mounded aquifer, and then the lower dune sand aquifer, and then the 180. So the 2022 model created a different hydrostratigraphic sequence than had been used in the 2016 model. So when I'm speaking about the dune sand aquifer, I'm speaking about the zone, the area, the spatial area, both laterally and vertically that you're talking about.
So does that mean both above and below the FO-SVO?
Generally speaking, I want here, again, it's difficult because of the way the models have broken the hydrostratigraphy out, but in this case, I'm talking about the area above the FO-SVA, the Fort Ord Salinas Valley Aquitard.
Did your converted steady state models of 2022 from the August 2022 North Marina model evaluate the K value for just the perched mounded aquifer?
No, my models, quote unquote, they're not really my models. They're a steady state equivalent of the 2022 model. We made no changes to the hydraulic conductivity distributions or the hydrostratigraphy in the steady state version.
And is your, I'm sorry, I don't get this as fast as I should maybe, but is your belief that there's error in conductivity applicable to both the perch mounded layer and the dune sand, or just the dune sand, or just the perch mounded?
So again, we're speaking vernacular. In the model, we can speak to layers. That's how the model is defined. And in fact, the model for a given layer sometimes simulates multiple aquifers. So it is my testimony that the assignment of 2 feet per day hydraulic conductivity, by contrast to the adjacent 25, 20, and 625, I believe, feet per day conductivities, effectively creates a barrier to flow that separates the recharge, the capacity of fresh water that originates as recharge in the aquifer that is above the Fort Ord SVA, whether you want to call that the upper dune sand aquifer or the upper perch mounded aquifer or just simply the dune sand aquifer. It inhibits the, as we saw from the particle tracks, it precludes the ability of the model to simulate flow from reaching the ocean or the project area.
Okay. Mr. Lilly, at some point, I think, you asked about a document that I read that sentence from. We're going to try to find that in a format that's acceptable for submission. And then I think this discussion of transmissivity in which layer is one that we think should be visited on again.
Oh, there's no question about we're going to need to visit on this, but thank you for reminding me. And yes, please see if you can find the document in a way that I can tell where the values are supposed to be from. And obviously we need to have somebody authenticate it. Hopefully some Cal-Am witness can authenticate that.
Right. And then
with that, if we're to a break here, I'm sorry, but
that's
for
okay.
Staff needs, we do need to take a break for 15 minutes. Is this?
I had just a quick question for you.
Okay.
Which is,
okay, I'm not under oath, but go ahead.
You're not. No, this is like what you would wish, because there are 6 different studies ranging from 1987 through 2010 related to the Fort Ord area and the topic that we just finished? And do you want just what the summary was from these technical people who submitted it to the Coastal Commission, or do you want the underlying studies? That was my question.
I think that's really up to you and your experts to decide what
Okay.
you think you want to submit in rebuttal. I mean, I have no way of not knowing what's out there. I mean, my gut feeling is let's not inundate the record any more than we have to. So I'll say that. But if
Okay.
you think there are things that are relevant, I mean, this issue of the different hydraulic conductivities in the model layers, particularly apparently in layer 2, is very critical to our discussion. So if you have evidence that you think is relevant to that, we certainly need to, I mean, I would like to see it. I'll just
Yeah.
say that.
Okay. All right. I think we're at your
Okay,
break.
so anyway, I apologize, but we are real people with real lives here, and we need to have a break. So we'll be back at 3 o'clock. Please don't log off, but just mute and turn off your camera, and we'll come back at 3. Thank you.
I don't think so, Tim.
Okay, we'll get started in just a minute. We just need Mr. Osias back.
My apologies. I was trying to find a PDF page to help with the searching of documents.
There are challenges, and I came back a couple of seconds early. So go ahead, Mr. Osias, you may continue your cross-examination.
Thank you. First, let me say, although I don't have a question to go back to, I just want to make sure I didn't mislead anyone. The studies that involve the K values and the summary that I read come from both the Fort Ord plume area and the Monterey landfill area.
Mr. Lilly, I'm just going to object at this point. Mr. Osias is kind of giving a lot of testimony here. If he's got a document that CalAm submitted in the record, I'm sure we'd all like to see that. I specifically asked their panel, Dr. Ye and Mr. Leffler, what information they had to support the K value of 2 in layer 2, and they said none. I think Dr. Ye said nothing. He didn't say nothing. He said that he had no evidence for that. Like,
Well,
that's been the time for this. And if he has something that they've since tried to find to support this, I don't think it's proper to just be asking Dr. Kincaid to respond to something he's never seen and that hasn't been authenticated or put in front of anybody.
Okay, yeah, first of all, for the rules of evidence, they are quite broad on what can be used for impeachment purposes or to try to refresh a witness's recollection. So I allowed the question, although frankly, I shared a lot of your concerns, Mr. Brochard. I had no idea what document he was talking about, or frankly, even what area it was referring to. So we don't need to go back over that. But what I said to Mr. Osias is if he wants to bring in evidence of these prior studies and the K values, he said for the Fort Ord area, but for any area, he's going to have to produce the documents and have witnesses to authenticate them. So he has not done either of those yet. And, I'm sure Mr. Osias understands that what he says about those is not testimony. So it wasn't exactly an objection, but your comment is noted, Mr. Brochard, and I agree with it. And I don't think Mr. Osias disputes the fact that if he wants to offer these documents, he's going to have to, number one, offer them, and number two, have some witness under oath authenticate them. So with that,
my re-raising it was merely to make sure no one said, geez, you said Fort Ord only.
it's fine. Thank you for the clarification. You're both proceeding in good faith while vigorously representing your clients. So there is no problem at all with that, and I understand that. But I hope I'm clear. I am trying to keep an eye on the fact that we only have evidence that is given under oath or documents that are authenticated that we are going to rely upon for our report. And by the way, I guess I could point out, this is an informal proceeding. This isn't even technically a hearing. So we have a fair amount of leeway, but I said early on, I think the very first time we ever met, that I thought the hearing procedure gave us the structure and the rigor that was best to protect all parties' rights and go forward. So that is the way I plan to go forward, even if we in fact have some leeway here, this being a court reference. So with that, Mr. Osias, why don't you continue with your cross-examination? I hope you've at least finished your first of your topics, which you mentioned before the lunch break, which was gradient. I'm afraid I don't think you've covered any of the next 4 yet, but I hope you're going to be able to move through them a little more quickly.
Mr. Lilly?
Oh, it's
Is it-
okay. Who?
I'm sorry, it's Vera. I just think I have a piece of information that would be incredibly helpful for this discussion that is already in evidence. And I think it would address Mr. Osias's specific comment with regard to hydraulic conductivities directly in the area of the wave cut terrace. There's a specific information from Fort Ord that is
Yeah, I'm
very
sorry.
helpful.
I'm sure you were right, but I have to respect my process here, which is to go forth with which witnesses are testifying and so forth. So please as necessary, if you don't think that's been adequately addressed, work with Mr. Brochard and he can ask when the appropriate time to bring that up is, but I just don't think it's fair for me to basically interrupt Mr. Osias's cross-examination at this point. But at some point, we will get to that. And please make sure to work with Mr. Brochard or one of his, or Mr. Wilkins or whoever, which attorney you're working with, to make sure that that does get to come out. And we will do that at the appropriate time. So
Thank you.
with that, Mr. Osias, please proceed with your.
Thank you. And
cross-examination.
in answering your question, I sort of have good news and bad news. I'm not quite done with gradient, but it will subsume many of the other topics.
Good, I hope so.
Okay, so Exhibit 7, CalAm Exhibit 79, PDF page, which is what I was looking for, I believe is 109. It's the same figure 12 we looked at with the seawater intrusion map.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get it on the screen. That does help me. And I think the rest of you to see where we are. Okay, we have that on the screen. We've seen this exhibit before.
Right.
Go ahead, and Miss Mullen, just there you go. One
Okay.
more notch. There we go. Perfect. All
Thank
right.
you. So,
please proceed with your question.
Dr. Kincaid, when we were discussing about this before, you acknowledged that seawater intrusions moving inland and that there's a landward gradient. Both of those are important for me vocabulary wise to make sure I get right. Correct. That's correct, right?
Objection vague as to aquifer and he's referring to.
Okay, well, this map refers to the 180-foot aquifer. So, Mr. Osias, why don't you, I'm going to sustain the objection. Just restate your question with the specific reference to the 180-foot aquifer.
I will. And it was the question I had asked him before about the 180-foot aquifer. So I'll ask it again. The 180-foot aquifer with the seawater intrusion depicted on figure 12 to exhibit 79 reflects seawater intrusion moving inland. And I believe you acknowledge that was also a landward gradient for that aquifer, correct?
Correct.
And you gave, in response to some question, an answer that included, according to my notes, that was caused by inland pumping, correct?
I said that seawater intrusion is caused by pumping. Yes.
Okay. Did you not mean that the landward gradient was caused by inland pumping?
No, both of those things are caused by pumping.
Okay. And the pumping is inland, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And if you reduce the inland pumping, the consequence is at least some reduction in the landward gradient, correct?
Certainly that is the presumption. Yes.
Well, I think your own use of the models confirms at least that trend, less pumping, flattening of the gradient, correct?
No, that's not correct. In the models prior to the 2022 version, the gradients have been specified by scenario. So in that case, we make no changes. In fact, the model doesn't simulate any pumping other than the slant well pumping. In the 2022 version of the model, according to the report, as I understand the purpose of the modeling and the handoff between the Salinas Valley integrated model and the North Marina groundwater model, the purpose of scenarios 6 and 9 were to simulate different levels of reduction in pumping, and then see how that reduced pumping would affect the capture zones and the let's call it the impacts of the proposed project. But I am and did not have a chance to investigate and determine the degree to which those reductions in pumping, as is specified by the model scenario name, it actually do equate to a change in the overall gradient across the model domain. So those are, that becomes a very, becomes a dependent characteristic that would need to be evaluated. And I did not have a chance to complete that analysis.
Okay. And I thank you. You have rightfully corrected me, because now you've refreshed my recollection of our discussion of this at the depot. I believe now, because I had confused topics, I believe you had said before, capture zone varies with pumping volumes, not gradient. Is that more accurate summary?
Yes, the capture zone for a pumping well varies directly with the size of the capture zone varies directly with the magnitude of the pumping.
Okay. And with constant pumping, the gradient, a difference in gradient also affects the size of the capture zone, correct?
Well, in this case, that is what I concluded, and what Mr. Weiss concluded through his scenario analyses, that with a constant pumping, a change in the overall regional gradient across the model domain, a reduction in the overall gradient across the model domain causes the capture zones, the landward portion of the capture zones, to get larger, to expand.
Okay. And so now going back to gradient, in the state of nature, without inland pumping, presumably in general at least, inland water flows to the sea, groundwater either would flow in that direction or be relatively flat. Is that a generalized starting point before
Yeah.
anyone would be pumping?
Yes, generally speaking, that would be the presumption.
Okay, and the seaward, pardon me, the seawater intrusion map plotting, or that's a bad word because that sounds too precise. This seaward intrusion map over years, illustrating movement inland, is the result of cumulative inland pumping?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I can't verify that, so I didn't do that study or even have an intimate knowledge of it. But based on my understanding, yes, it is cumulative inland pumping is the thought to be the cause, obviously, of that seawater intrusion map.
And is it correct that what would have been either seaward or flat gradient becomes landward by turning on pumps inland?
Yes.
Okay. If we turn on pumps at the seashore, does it have an effect on the gradient?
Yes.
And is the influence to cause the gradient to become more seaward rather than landward?
Well, the cone of depression, or the depression around the wells, will increase the gradient from the ocean inland, because the ocean heads will stay constant, and it will also increase the gradient from the land towards the sea, because presumably at some point distant away from the pumping, those heads will also remain untouched or constant relative to the change in pumping.
So before we figure out or model how much, at least conceptually, putting pumps to extract water along the coast would influence the landward gradient in the 180-foot aquifer in a seaward direction.
The wells on the coast will cause drawdown, which will affect the local gradients, yes. So, and those gradients will be affected the way that I just described.
In a seaward direction, correct?
There will be a landward direction component of that where the drawdown is near the coast. And so from the coast to the inland to where the groundwater levels are depressed, there will be a landward gradient. And then from some point inland where the heads don't go down as a consequence of pumping, there will be a seaward increase in gradient.
Again, without quantifying any, or attempting to even quantify any of that influence, if you move the red blob on Cemex's property south to a location within a mile south, would that, in your mind, cause any significant difference just because of that location?
Objection B, incomplete hypothetical.
I'm going to sustain that objection. I think you have to be more specific, Mr. Osias. I mean, moving, we said the red blob, I assume you meant if one were to develop the Cal-Am slant wells 1 mile farther south, what would the effects be? But I think it was not fair to just say in general what the effects would be. I think you have to be more specific about what you are asking about as far as effects would be. So the objection sustained.
Thank you. If nothing changed regarding the desalination project, except that the slant well locations were moved 1 mile south, and ignoring any quantitative distance, qualitatively, it would change the gradient between the slant well and the ocean to increase it landward, and it would change the gradient landward to increase it seaward, correct?
Yes, as I've said, I mean, that will change the gradient. There are two things here that I fear are being conflated. One is the drawdown, which is the level of the groundwater in the aquifer, which will go down, and the drawdown then will exacerbate seawater intrusion to this area. The other is the local gradients established around the drawdown. So wherever the groundwater level is lower than they were previously, that will obviously affect the local gradients in all directions. But that doesn't mean that water will flow from land to the sea. That's just like we talked about with the capture zone. If it was totally flat, then the depression caused by pumping would cause all of the flow to the Kona depression would be the capture zone. But because there's already a gradient, just like you had shown in a previous map where you see deflections in the groundwater flow paths, that's what you would expect. Deflections, not necessarily reversals. In order to achieve a reversal of flow, then you would have to overcome the pre-existing gradient and cause it to change direction. So if there was no seawater intrusion already, in my opinion, and you start pumping at the coast, you would induce flow from the ocean into the Kona depression very close to the wells, and then you would flatten or lower the gradient. You would have a bit of a steeper gradient in towards the area where the groundwater levels are depressed.
So I'm having trouble in part because people want to rush to the opinion that they have in the case. I'm just trying to lay some foundation. Essentially, inland pumps seem to cause the gradient to go landward. Seaward pumps should influence the direction of the gradient seaward to some degree. Correct.
again, it's
Yeah,
vague and incomplete.
yes.
It's more complicated than that.
Well, I mean,
So,
and
so
the-
wait, so Mr. Bouchard, well, I don't know whether you're stating an objection or not. I think it is more complicated than that, but I think I'm going to overrule the objection. I didn't hear you object, but if you were objecting, I'm going to overrule it. I think Mr. or Dr. Kincaid, you're trying to answer these questions, recognizing that they're very general and that the details may matter here. So go ahead and answer with that understanding. That's certainly what I'm hearing you try to do here.
And I'll pile on, Mr. Lee. I did ask it. I tried to preface it saying in general. I'm not trying to get to this model result yet. Okay. So in general, landward pumps make the gradient, inland pumps, I'm sorry, make the gradient landward. Shoreline pumps should have somewhat the reciprocal effect in the other direction, should they not?
yeah, yes, generally speaking, well, the pumping will cause the gradient to change in all directions. So wherever you pump, there will be a steepening of the gradient on all sides around the pumps. So in this example, the gradient from the ocean to the pumps will get steeper, and the gradient from the inland area to the pumps will also get steeper. So it will steepen the gradient, the seaward gradient on the landward side of the pumps, and it will steepen the landward component of the gradient on the seaward side of the pumps. Yes.
And are you aware that there was a alternative site evaluated for a desalination plant?
If you're talking about the Portero vicinity or area, yes, I was aware of that. We looked at some of that in our assessment in 2016.
And did you determine that that location would create similar impacts as the present location?
Honestly, I don't remember. I do remember thinking that there was a bit of at odds concerns here, that I believe that, again, based on my recollection, I believe that the Portero site was ruled out due to a perceived potential impact to a sensitive receptor up there in that area, but that the potential impact to Marina Coast Water District would likely be, I remember thinking that it would likely be lower if the project area was moved further away, obviously, from the Marina Coast Water District wells.
Do you know did you know that at one time Marina Coast Water District was proposing a joint desalination project with Cal-Am?
I did not know that.
Okay, so I won't ask you where it was going to be then, because you wouldn't know, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Did you know that there's a small desalination plant at MCWD's headquarters?
I did not know that, no.
Okay, so let's go to
I guess the one thing I'll point out here that is that we're talking about relative impacts. If you take the red blob as you describe and you move it west, then a lot of these problems go away. So if you pump from a point further into the ocean, the impacts to the landward resources become diminished. So that would be also following the logic that you were talking about.
can we put up MCWD 64?
Okay. MCWD 64.
It is very long, I believe, so it might be slow. I hope not. PDF page 346. Actually, let him see the first page first, if that's okay, Mr. Lee.
Let's first go to the first page so we'll know what it is.
I think we'll have to go to page 2, unless he
Yeah,
knows the pleading.
Okay. So I'll just state for the record that this heading is Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin, 400 foot aquifer subbasin groundwater sustainability plan. So first of all, I guess we'll ask you, Dr. Kincaid, have you ever seen this document before?
I don't believe so. I scan through documents quite a bit, looking for specific things, but I don't believe I've seen this or looked at this document.
Okay, well, we'll go to page 340. Did you say 346?
Yes,
We'll go there, but that's certainly an important caveat here, Mr. Osias, for asking him questions about a document he has not apparently seen before.
and can we blow it up so we just see the box on top?
Yeah, we'll make it a little bigger if we can. Okay, so go ahead and ask your question.
Well, first I just want to get him oriented. So you see that the heading is called priority projects,
Yes,
and row numbered 6 is seawater intrusion pumping barrier.
yes, I see that.
Okay. And we discussed seawater intrusion pumping barriers somewhat at your deposition, correct?
Yes,
You know what a seawater intrusion pumping barrier is.
yes.
Okay. And I think,
Well, there are two types of seawater intrusion barriers, an injection pumping barrier, or an injection barrier and an extraction barrier.
Okay.
I don't know which one this is referring to. I presume based on our conversations at the deposition that you're talking about an extraction barrier.
thank you. That completes your answer?
Yes.
Okay. I think you coined a phrase at your deposition that I'm going to paraphrase. Tell me if it's correct. A problem caused by extraction cannot be solved by extraction.
That is what I believe. Yes.
Can we go to PDF page 372?
Okay. 372.
And scroll down so he could see the heading. I keep going to the bottom of the page, please.
Okay,
Thank you. So, Dr. Kincaid, the preferred project 6 is again with the same title that you saw on the table, seawater intrusion pumping barrier. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
Okay. And the first sentence, rather simple statement that I'll read, seawater intrusion will be halted using a pumping barrier along the coast, period. You see that?
I do. Yes.
And that doesn't really tell you in the same detail what you were saying in terms of the two types. So if we could go to the next page.
I can concede right here. It's talking about extraction wells, so it's an extraction barrier.
yeah,
I
it does
guess
say
I-
pumping barrier, so we know it's extraction, not injection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to be fair, injection pumping would be still pumping, so we have to be clear about that.
Oh,
Right,
thank you.
I'm trying to be incredibly clear because we can still go to the next page if that's all right.
Let's go to the next page. I'm sorry, my bad for making assumptions. Thank
And
you.
we can
Dr. Kincaid.
stop there. And you can read this whole second paragraph here if you wish, but the third sentence sort of summarizes what the 18 wells would do. Which
Yes,
is
sir. I understand. That doesn't. I don't agree with this as a. I would not recommend this if I was a professional in this area, and the reason for that is that if the extraction does successfully cross the entire aquifer, in other words, across the boundaries, yes, you can halt the seawater intrusion, but that will come at the expense of an appreciable amount of inland, presumably fresh water going into those wells also, for exactly the same reasons that we're here today. because pumping will not just pump from one direction, it will pump from both. So you can let's just pretend for just an instant that you are a landowner very near to this proposed extraction barrier on the landward side. You would be likely be disenfranchised by the inaction of this, which this is, in my opinion, why most of the places in the world that have to deal with seawater intrusion prefer to use an injection pumping barrier system, where they take some form of return water and inject it along the coast, thereby raising the aquifer water levels, preventing seawater intrusion, while also causing recharge to the aquifer and not therefore disenfranchising anybody in the basin. So this comes at an expense, and that expense, depending on who you are, could be very unpalatable.
Excuse me, so Dr. Kincaid, when you say disenfranchising, is presumably the inland property owners' wells would not have seawater intrusion, but it's the problem that the heads would drop dramatically?
Yes, you'd essentially be, dewatering a portion of the aquifer to prevent seawater from coming in, which then could be alleviated, with other strategies of managed aquifer recharge. But like I said, in my experience, most of the places around the world deal with seawater intrusion, abating seawater intrusion with an injection barrier system, so that they raise the heads and shut down the landward gradient while not depleting the aquifer.
So two
Okay, go ahead.
things. Thank you. Two things. One, this is an informal proceeding, so I will take what I've been given. But I want to note there was no question pending. And it's going to be hard for me to hit my time limit if I don't even get to ask a question before I have Dr. Kincaid give his entire opinion again as to what's wrong with something. So.
Okay, that comment's noted. I'll try to keep control over this proceeding. So go ahead with your question.
Thank you. So we now know the conclusion, but the GSP itself talks about the volume. So just so you can get a sense of scale, I'm not saying you studied this, but you could see it was going to withdraw 30,000. Okay. And at least for purposes of their description, that's a lot more than the slant wells, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I think consistent with what you expressed, it notes that 22,000 would come from the 180-400 subbasin, correct?
Yes, it appears to do that. Yes.
It says that. And,
Yes.
And that would be, again, you haven't studied it, but that would be a concern you'd have, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you'll see farther down, I think, something that you were also trying to describe, having not studied this, which is half of the 22,000 would come from the inland side of the barrier.
So, Mr. Lilly, I'd like to object at this time. What's the relevance and what exactly is this supposed to be referring to in Mr. Kincaid's testimony? Provided testimony on models. We're now reading random pages of a GSP, which he's testified that he's not seen or read, to, I guess, get testimony that 33,000 is larger than 30,000 is larger than 7,000 or something.
Okay, so first of all, maybe I shouldn't have reminded you all this is an informal proceeding, but even if this were a formal proceeding, under Government Code 11513 subdivision B, cross-ex is not limited to the scope of direct. So that part of the objection is overruled. But the other part, I would like Mr. Osias to respond to, because even that Government Code section limits evidence to relevant evidence. What is the relevance of this to this proceeding? I mean, this is at most a potential project that's discussed in a GSP. So what is the relevance of asking Dr. Kincaid questions about this potential project to our proceeding?
So there's several potential relevant points. Okay. And I have been interrupted by Mr. Brochard far more than we interrupted anyone else, but 2 sentences down, it talks about how the desalination plant could be part of this project.
So what is the, again, what?
Okay, so the conclusion one could draw is that independent people whose purpose is to protect the basin have formed an opinion contrary to Dr. Kincaid's that extraction along the coast could be good for the protection of fresher groundwater in the basin rather than harmful. It's very clear, and Dr. Kincaid will tell us every time he has a chance, that he believes it will be harmful, and he's explained why. But there are multiple opinions on this subject, and his is an isolated one.
Well, wait. Now you're testifying. You're getting.
No, I'm
beyond me.
arguing the relevance is, do reasonable experts charged with the public good have a contrary opinion to his? And might that be relevant to the credibility of his opinion?
Okay, and this exhibit is already, I believe this has already been admitted into evidence. And you can refer to this in your arguments. And you can, even if I allow it, even have your witnesses testify on rebuttal about this. And frankly, Mr. Leffler already testified about this to some extent, but I have 2 problems with this, Mr. Osias. Problem number 1 is this is at most a conceptual description of a project that's nowhere near fruition, I'll say, even really making any progress on it. And therefore, it's not clear how that would fit into Cal-Am's proposed slant well pumping, which of course is a very specific project. So I guess I just don't see how this is going to be relevant to our discussion here. And then number 2, okay, so you've made your point that this report says that, and clearly Dr. Brochard disagrees with that. So what's the point of continuing to ask him questions about this topic where undoubtedly, as you just said, he's going to continue to say he disagrees? So I'm not
saying
seeing
Dr.
the point of this
Brochard,
line of questioning.
but you meant Dr. Kincaid. So
Excuse me, what did I say?
you said Dr. Brochard.
We're not going to promote him.
It was nice to hear, but
But yeah. So
He's
my
a lawyer. He can't do
yeah,
that.
my response, Mr. Lilly, is
Go
this.
ahead.
Yeah, my response is this, and we're taking more time because I had, other than to point out the desal facility, which now I have, I was done. But the point is, just using the document would draw an accusation, an objection, or an argument that we didn't give Dr. Kincaid a chance to respond to it. Okay,
Well, now you have.
and
he
that's
has
right.
responded.
And that was the purpose.
So is there any reason to continue this line of questioning?
Other than to show him, if you don't mind, that on the same page at the bottom, the injection approach that he would prefer was rejected.
Okay, so let's just scroll down. Maybe we can wrap this up with this line of questioning with one more question. So scroll down, Ms. Mullen, please scroll down. And let's just read this last paragraph. Is this the paragraph you want us to look at?
It's the very last sentence on the page.
Okay. So we'll read both of these paragraphs to ourselves silently, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Kincaid a question. Okay, so Dr. Kincaid, have you had a chance to read these 2 paragraphs?
I'm not quite. I read the last one. If you give me one more minute, I
Go
will
ahead.
finish. Okay,
Okay, so Mr. Osias, I really think you can limit this to one question, but go ahead, ask your question about this to Dr. Kincaid.
I don't need to ask him because he started before I could ask any questions with what his opinion was, and it's not, he doesn't believe that the people who are opining in this fashion are correct. He thinks they're wrong and he would do it a different way. He's already said that.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think that really mischaracterizes it, because the reason this is rejecting injection more than anything, I mean, I can just read this.
No, I was talking about the whole project, the
Oh.
whole thing. He testified before, and I didn't get to ask him. He testified before. If it was up to him, injection's better in general than extraction. And he then read the extraction part and gave his opinion about why it would make no sense. So I'm done. But I do think it's important to remember, Mr. Lilly, that Ms. Nelson got to testify about how much this would cost and why it wouldn't happen, and that reduced pumping, which is not even on the list of 9, would be predicted to occur in the GSP. And so the relevance is related to that as well. But I'm finished and ready to go to another topic.
Okay, let's move on then. Thank
Was
you.
there a question for Ms. Nelson in there?
No,
No,
there's not a question for Ms. Nelson. He said he's moving on. So
we
move
can
on.
we can take this down.
All right, let's go. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. You can stop screen sharing that exhibit and let's move on then.
So gradient by definition is in at least in layman's terms, the slope of the surface of the groundwater.
yes,
Okay, at least that's how you defined it for me on Friday, correct?
yes,
And positive gradient is landward, and well, it depends, you could define it either way, but in the models we've been looking at, positive gradient is landward and negative gradient is seaward.
I think they're defined in different places, but I prefer to just use the landward gradient and then the magnitude, and then the in other words, the textual descriptor rather than the numeric. So there's a landward gradient, which means that the ocean head is higher than the inland head, and there's a seaward gradient, in which case the landward head is higher than the ocean head.
And a gradient is the totality, results from the totality of all of the inputs minus all of the outputs.
Again, we had this discussion in the deposition. So it depends on whether you're talking about the model scenarios or whether we're still talking about like the real world condition.
Real world.
In the real world, the gradient is affected by the net, by the combination, the totality of all of the inputs and outputs. Yes.
So, and in the real world, in the Salinas Valley, the inputs are the Salinas River and other surface water sources, rivers or lakes, correct?
That is a source of either out or in, depending on the heads. Yes.
Okay, and rainfall percolation into the aquifer,
Which, yes, we call recharge. Yes.
and if it's happening, injection wells.
Yes.
Have I hit upon the major sources of inputs?
Yes. Let's go with yes.
Okay, and in the Salinas Valley, the major sources of outputs are agricultural wells,
Yes.
perhaps surface flow, if it's a gaining river from the groundwater,
Yes.
municipal wells,
Yes.
I suppose, other wells that aren't agricultural or municipal.
Any extractions. Yes.
Okay. Are there any other major outputs in the Salinas Valley that you're aware of?
I believe there's some riparian evapotranspiration occurring in some places, but I haven't studied that. But I believe that there are areas where evapotranspiration is a significant outflow.
So that would mean where the roots of a plant suck water out of the ground and it evapotranspirates from their leaves into the atmosphere, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if you can comment, is an example of that like Aruda elimination? Because I noticed that was one of the preferred projects.
I can't speak to the plant, but I believe that would be consistent with trying to reduce evapotranspiration. Yes.
Okay. And your comment about plants reminded me that rainfall percolation or recharge can be affected by the vegetative state of the land,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So recharge in the Salinas Valley in a bare dune should be different than in a highly vegetated inland acre.
Yes, it should be higher.
Okay. And if you were going to model, pardon me, if you were going to use recharge for the whole domain in a model, would you try to average all of the different heterogeneous places to come up with an average recharge value?
If it were me, I would break it into zones, and I would assign the recharge by land use characteristic, and then ultimately through calibration, the same way that I would work on arriving at hydraulic conductivities.
Now, recharge, at least meaning rainfall and percolation, can also be field tested, correct?
It's very difficult. It's a very hard to measure parameter.
Okay. So there's
In fact,
maybe,
you can't measure it directly.
okay. The amount of rain can be measured.
Yes, that's pretty straightforward. It's the
Okay, so it's-
evapotranspiration that's difficult to measure.
Okay. And how about the percolation?
You can't measure that. Well, it's not normally measured. I'm aware of studies that have been participatory in some studies at Yucca Mountain where we measured vertical percolation through the unsaturated zone.
The several of the model runs have used 5 inches as a recharge value, correct?
Yes, Mr. Weiss used a rate of 5 inches per year recharge to, as I understand, reading his documentation, he used that originally to raise the heads in layer 2 to be more commensurate with measured heads in the dune sand aquifer. And then he went on to vary the rates of recharge to evaluate the effect of recharge rate on the predictions, on model predictions.
Let me go back to inputs and outputs for just 1 minute in the Salinas Valley, because I think it's captured in the idea of net. But if a farmer extracts water from a well, that's an output, applies it to his field, some of it evaporates, but some of it might perk back. So it's sort of a net that you need to use, not just gross. Is that correct?
I believe you're referring to return flow, which is a very argumentative topic because, again, it's not something that can be measured directly. And so there is lots of energy put into reliably estimating return flows.
And so if the choice is to try to estimate it or ignore it, what's your advice?
Dangerous. It depends. If there's a reasonable way to estimate it, then I would, of course, want to account for it. Aside from that, I would probably tend to maybe not ignore it, but explore it through sensitivity. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So going back to the 5 inches, did you see any reference in an appendix to a technical report that percolation of 5 inches was utilized to model the dune sand, but not appropriate for, I'm sorry, was used to for modeling of the dune sand area. Did you see it tied to that at all?
I saw that Mr. Weiss referred to 5 inches per year and referenced that as being a relatively agreed to value for the area. And that's I saw that referenced in his document.
So does that mean you didn't see it referenced with connection to the dune sand specifically?
I don't remember seeing that it was tied specifically to the dune sand aquifer. No, but that was the point of his application of that to, like I said, I can't presume to know exactly why he did everything he did, but from what I gather from his reporting, his intention was to raise the heads in the dune sand aquifer as it was simulated in the 2016 North Marina groundwater model, such that they were a more reasonable depiction of the real world.
When you did your model or your model revisions, you and looked at the recharge as compared to no recharge, you used the 5 inches also, correct?
Yes, because most of those were Mr. Weiss's models. We simply reran them and then exported different types of outputs from them to create the different types of analyses that we did.
And it was domain wide, the 5 inches, correct?
Sorry, what was that?
The model used the 5 inch recharge domain wide.
A domain wide, yes.
Is that the?
Well, no, on the land, he applied it to the landward component, not to the ocean cells. But yes,
okay.
Landward domain wide, yes.
Okay. Going back to Mr. Lilly's question, trying to curry favor now. If you did a model with pumping on and a model with pumping off to compare the effects, you would subtract one from the other for whatever you were looking at. Is that your normal method?
Yes, and that's the method that we used here as well.
And hydrofolks used a superposition method, correct?
They used the superposition method to evaluate drawdown, yes.
Is drawdown the only thing they evaluated?
It's been a while since I looked at that report explicitly. I remember that the dominant thing that the dominant analysis that they pulled out of the model was drawdown. But I believe there's also depictions of capture zones, in which case they would have run those from the model as well, I believe.
So sticking with superposition now, because that was a topic I promised to get through. Reminding you, I think, of what I asked you yesterday. You've never prepared a superposition model for a complex setting. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've never explicitly developed a superposition numerical model.
I left out the word numerical, but I meant to include that. So thank you. And in your 20 plus years, you've never been asked to critique a superposition numerical model other than in this proceeding, correct?
That's correct.
And I think you opined you had never seen a superposition numerical model in a complex setting used anywhere else. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you expressed an opinion at your deposition that it wasn't really well suited to that, correct?
Superposition, in my opinion, is suited or is intended to represent or to evaluate one particular thing. In most cases, I would imagine drawdown. So it is not well suited to the evaluation of multiple simultaneous hydrologic effects or hydrologic conditions.
So a superposition model starts by essentially converting to zero all parameters, boundary conditions, except for the one that you're trying to determine the impact of, correct?
I think that's simplified, but generally speaking, the model is set up such that there is really no variation other than what your variation in those kind of those processes other than the one you're trying to evaluate. So in the case of the 2016 model, they did change the boundary conditions and the source sink terms. They reset those to zero in order to create the superposition model so that they could evaluate drawdown due to pumping.
So if you leave the superposition model in its virgin state with all boundary conditions at zero, you're identifying sort of in the abstract, maybe not applicable to the real world yet, the influence of the slant wells on drawdown, correct?
You're evaluating the drawdown due to slant well pumping.
Okay. And one of our goals not our goals, one of the purposes that you agreed with early on in my questioning of you is that the modeling is essentially to try to determine the impact of slant well pumping as compared to not pumping. So at least that superposition model starts with a basic premise of what's the impact of pumping. That's a good start, isn't it?
With respect to drawdown, yes.
Okay. And then if you change a boundary condition to include a gradient, either measured or hypothetical, doesn't the superposition model take that boundary condition into effect?
Yes, of course, if you assign the boundary condition to the superposition model, it's no longer flat. It becomes a model that incorporates a gradient.
And if the gradient is a result of recharge, then the recharge is considered and evaluated as part of running the superposition model.
No, because you're only capable in that simplistic form to evaluate one thing at a time. So if you're trying to evaluate the effect of gradient, you change the gradient. If you're trying to evaluate the effect of recharge, you change the recharge. If you want to evaluate how both of those two things together equate to real world conditions, then you abandon the superposition model and go back to your calibrated model and look at that.
So it's your opinion that the recharge included in a gradient utilized as a boundary condition cannot be properly utilized by a superposition model as the recharge.
It's my opinion that as I've stated in my testimony, that the intent of the superposition of the intent of the models that have been changed and modified is to evaluate the effect of one thing, one of those processes on the potential impacts from the wells at a time. So Mr. Weiss started and we followed on in suit by making changes simultaneously one at a time so that we could look at the effect of gradient on, let's say, capture zones, and then the effect of recharge on capture zones. But as I've said, I don't wish to convey confidence in the position of any of the lines on the map in terms of where they are and the precision of where they are located. I believe that the model is not reliable with respect to those lines on a map, but I believe that we can use the totality of the modeling to get a reasonable understanding of how the impacts are likely to change due to the various things that the hydrologic conditions that have been evaluated, which are gradient and recharge.
So Dr. Kincaid, we're allowed as lawyers to show treatises and articles to experts that are in their field. I'd like to start with CalAm 123.
Okay, let's post CalAm 123, screen share it. Are we now into your last line of questioning, Mr. Osias?
Yes, other than to, in conclusion, show him how Hydro Focus addressed these criticisms of superposition model. No, that's not fair. Why they chose superposition model and the reasons they thought it was well supported and calibrated.
Okay, well, we'll see. Yeah, all right. Let's go ahead with this. I think hopefully this will go fairly fast.
This should go fairly fast. But I should let Dr. Kincaid see the publication, which I think is it's already in the footer.
Okay, we have exhibit CalAm 123 on the screen. What do you want him to look at?
Well, I'd like him first to see what it's published in.
Oh, okay. So we'll screen that. Maybe there's a footer at the bottom of the first
Yes.
page.
That's what I said, yes. Oops, too far.
Okay, it looks like it says volume 35, number 1, groundwater, January, February 1997. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
So what
Is that a
it?
publication with which you're familiar, Dr. Kincaid?
Yes,
Okay, respected.
yes.
Is it sort of for hydrogeology wonks?
It is a professional journal in my field, yes. So it is for mostly for professionals.
Okay, and maybe let me just show him the next page, Mr. Lilly, please,
All right, we'll go to page 2.
and just scroll down a little bit.
Okay, how far?
Just so we can see that there's math formulas and things.
I can see the groundwater flow equation, yes.
Okay, so this is not a casual reading layman's description of superposition modeling, correct?
No,
I mean, okay, so we can go back to the front page and I'll ask him if he's ever read this article.
no, I have not.
Do you recognize the authors?
I do not.
Do you want to see them?
I read their names the first when it was up at the first time. I don't know them. I see they're at the University of Idaho.
Okay. Thank you. Can
Now,
we go?
this document explains exactly what I just said, though. And just reading the abstract, it says that it measures one thing at a time, 1, 2, and 3. It's designed to evaluate changes in boundary conditions, changes by initial potentiometric surface and prescribed head boundaries, and simulating the specific recharge or discharge stress. So I've never said I'm not familiar with the process of superposition. It's designed to evaluate one thing at a time.
Okay, so
And
probably
I,
should stop
based on the
there.
abstract, I would presume that this is exactly what they did.
So I think you better stop there, Dr. Kincaid. We do have to let Mr. Osias ask questions here
Yes.
before we testify. So
Right.
please
I mean,
go
if he's
ahead.
going to presume to know what it says, I guess I should presume to ask him questions about it, but I'll skip it.
I think you should probably move on since he hasn't read this article before. I
Right.
don't think he has any, I mean, he certainly has more expertise than most of the rest of us, but we can all read the article as well as he can. So why don't
Okay,
we
so-
move on?
CalAm 124, please.
Okay, let's go to CalAm, exhibit CalAm 124. Okay, go ahead with your questions, Mr. Osias.
Well, because we're at the top, do you recognize any of these authors?
I do not. Well, I recognized Tim Durbin.
And who is he?
He was the author of the Salinas Valley Integrated Model, and is one of the experts for CalAm on this proceeding.
So just to correct you, the 1997 Salinas Valley Integrated Model was authored by Montgomery. Watson.
That was
Yeah,
the Salinas Valley Integrated Groundwater and Surface Water Model.
So
Mr. Durbin's model was described as the Salina, if I'm correct, the Salinas Valley Integrated Model.
So that's the 2022 one.
Yes.
Okay, then you were correct. I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to address that. And do you want to see what this is published in?
I can see right there, groundwater.
Okay, do you recognize that journal?
It's the same one that we just you just put up before. So yes.
Okay, so they changed the heading. And this is from 2008. Have you read this?
I have not.
Okay. And superposition works well for linear settings, correct?
I believe normally that it would be used for linear problems, yes. But as I've said, I don't use the superposition approach myself.
The impact of the slant wells on seawater intrusion would involve a linear or nonlinear setting?
It depends on where you're looking at. I mean, typically I would consider the problems to be the head related problems to be linear.
Thank you. Can we go to CalAm 125?
Okay. Let's go. We now have CalAm 125 on the screen.
This is from 2011. Have you ever seen this before?
I have not seen this. I've not read this document. I am familiar with, broadly familiar with this modeling endeavor.
Do you know the modelers?
I know one of the modelers that participated. I've worked with John Bredehoff, but I don't know if he was an author on this paper or not.
Okay, can we go to the next page, please?
I've worked with Keith Halford, and I've not worked. Well, I've not worked with Russell Plume.
Okay. Would you be able to opine whether you think, just from the title, this would be a complex setting or not?
I know that Mr. Halford is a very big proponent of simplifying very large scale problems into very simplistic two-dimensional analyses. So I can't speak to the document. I haven't read it, but it would not surprise me at all to see that this document was describing a method to simplify a complex problem.
For purposes of decision making, or would you not know?
I would not know if this was done specifically to support a decision. Generally speaking, the U.S. Geological Survey is done, or studies are done as research that become relied on in part to support decisions.
When USGS authors cite you as a reference, or as something you've published as a reference, is that generally an endorsement of your knowledge and skill in that area?
Well, in this case, I don't know about Mr. Plume, but Keith works for the U.S. Geological Survey. He just recently retired, so it's not so much an endorsement as it is. That's their job, is to do research and write publications, and they go through an internal publication process.
that's peer reviewed, I assume.
Yes, it goes to my knowledge. I've not been employed by the USGS, but I believe that it goes through an internal peer review process. Yes.
And the answer you gave was helpful, but it wasn't really what I was asking. I'm saying if these authors reference an article or something published by someone else, does that generally suggest a belief or endorsement that that person's an authority, or that article is valid?
Depends on how they reference it, but generally speaking, when we reference documents, other people's work, then we're either doing so because we relied on it or doing so because we disagree with it. So I can't, but generally speaking, I guess I would concede that if you're being referenced in a document, then you're being thought of as somebody that has something worthwhile to say about the topic.
Okay. So to save time, I'll just tell you that the article you saw just a moment ago, where Mr. Durbin was one of the authors, is one of the referenced articles at the end of this one. That suggests perhaps that Mr. Durbin's article was useful to these authors.
Mr. Slash, you're really getting far afield. If that's all you're citing this for, I really.
No, it's not. This is a complex setting to use superposition. I'm citing it for that.
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure. Well, I hope you can wrap up your line of questioning for Dr. Kincaid, because I'll just say, asking him about articles he's never read before does not seem very productive to me.
He was unaware of any superposition numeric model in a complex setting at his depot on Friday.
Okay, so you can argue in your argument that there in fact are uses of superposition in complex settings. That's fine. I don't know what more you're going to get out of him today on
Oh,
this.
not much, other than I wanted them to know about them, and I wanted your staff to know about them. And I guess I find it to be, and you can tell me to rest easier, but arguing something in our papers or orally even that we haven't given a witness a chance to comment on is going to draw a rebuke from somebody on the other side. So I'm just trying to prevent that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think you've gone far enough to prevent that. Here.
So I won't show them the last one.
I'll just say, I don't know how we're going to do our analysis here. I certainly have no idea how this is going to play out yet, but I'm pretty confident we are going to place a lot more stock into 2022 modeling, because of its updates and so forth, and it's not a superposition modeling approach, as opposed to the 2016 superposition modeling work. I mean, that's, Dr. Ye testified they made all those refinements because they thought they were valid. And of course, one of the things that changes is it's not superposition. So I don't know if that gives you some assurance or not, but I don't think this superposition is necessarily the front and center for the modeling work for this proceeding.
So, thank you. I will say, as a note at least, that there is field work, a variety of modeling approaches, and over a long series of time, all of which you've got, at least a sense of from these days of hearings. Our experts believe, despite all the differences, whether they're models or different kinds of models, or even different years of models, or field work, they are consistent. And so there is value in exploring the totality of the opinions as compared to a singular one. I'm not suggesting how you weight them, that obviously your staff will go through that.
Well, and we'll get briefing on that too. So,
Yes,
okay, well, I appreciate the clarification, but I think you've covered
I have.
position issue with Dr. Kincaid.
Right.
adequately.
And there's one other article, which I won't show them, but if we choose to point it out in our papers, I'll remember what you said.
Well, go ahead and put it up and ask him whether he's ever seen it before, or ask us to put it up and ask him if he's seen it before.
Okay, it's next in sequence.
All right, so let's post exhibit CalAm 126. We'll make it a little smaller so you can read the whole first page. Okay, so why don't you just ask Mr.
Let him see what it's published in, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Ask him whether he's familiar with this or if any other relevant background. I think if he says he's not familiar with it, we can probably move on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Have you ever seen this comparison of the superposition model with a fully populated model?
I have not.
Okay. And do you know Jennifer Sukau?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you can go ahead and take that down, Ms. Mullen. So go ahead with your questions, Mr. Osez.
I guess I will change my approach right now for time's sake. Dr. Kincaid, I believe you said you reviewed the calibration evaluation that Hydrofocus did with respect to the 2016 model.
Yes, I reviewed the calibration status of the 2016 model.
And your opinion is different from Hydrofocus's opinion about the quality of calibration?
I believe my opinion was that the model was poorly calibrated, particularly in the dune sand aquifer and the 180-foot aquifer.
And their opinion was contrary, correct?
I don't remember their opinion explicitly. I do remember that they said that they felt the model was calibrated.
And they included the three methodologies that you said should be done and showed their work, correct?
I believe they showed their work, yes.
Okay.
They showed the calibration in the different aquifers, yes.
And they also addressed why, to the extent there was any deficiency in certain data sets, a superposition model helped isolate the impacts of pumping from the slant wells, made it useful. They said that.
I remember reading their justification for the movement to, or the use of the superposition. But I don't remember exactly, I don't remember exactly why they said they wanted to do that.
Whatever they said, it didn't at the time you review it change your opinion, correct?
I don't understand what you're asking me. I believe their action to change it to superposition made it simpler for them to look at certain things, particularly drawdown.
Well, I'm sorry. Did they believe the slant wells would cause harm to the groundwater basin by increasing seawater intrusion?
I believe I don't remember exactly their conclusions right now. I could obviously refresh my memory on that, but I believe that they concluded that that the project would be within the parameters that like OWP that indicated it would be there would be no problem with it.
And you don't agree with that opinion?
I don't agree with the OWP calculations, and I believe that there will be more ocean water percentage or less ocean water percentage than has been predicted because of the model runs that we did. And I believe that there will be drawdown in the vicinity of the Marina Coast Water District water supply wells. And I believe that that drawdown will reduce the protective head there and increase the probability of seawater intrusion to those wells.
I think I had like one question left, Mr. Lilly, but I can't find my document. Hang on one minute.
Probably it's under your spilled coffee. Take a moment to go through it.
Thank you for reminding me. I'm living in it right now.
Please. I'm sorry to hear that that happened to you, but please take a moment to review your notes so you can make sure you're done.
That's my notes is what I was looking for. There, locked off. Oh, Hydro Focus looked at two different scale of pumping volumes. I mean, do you remember that?
I do, yes.
One was bigger than 15.5 by a lot. I can't
I
remember
believe
the
it-
exact number.
I can't remember the exact number either. I believe it was perhaps on the order of 23 or 22 MGD.
Okay. And I asked you at your depot about whether potential impacts or impacts from caused by the pumping would generally decline with less pumping. Do you remember I asking you that?
Yes.
And you said, yes, it would.
Yes, I believe that the probability of impact in all categories will go down as pumping rate goes down.
And if Cal-Am ends up pumping 25% less than 15.5, you would expect to see a material decline in impacts or potential impacts.
I would expect to see a decline in impacts, and all things being equal, I would expect it to be fairly linear. So, but I can't speak to exactly what how that reduction would be.
Okay. And I also asked you about if they extended their slant well into the under the seafloor farther. That would either be neutral or have a beneficial effect on any potential impacts. Do you remember that question?
Yes, I remember stipulating that if the screened interval was moved further offshore, in other words, if actual point of pumping was moved further away, then the expectation should be that the impacts to inland groundwater resources will diminish.
All right.
Also, we did stipulate that it was from the same aquifer from.
Yes, I think that what I said is if it's in the dune sand in 180 under the seafloor, but more of the screening is under the seafloor.
Yeah.
Effect would either be neutral or beneficial to potential impacts.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. And more likely to be beneficial than neutral, correct?
Yes, I believe that the further out the point of pumping is extended, the smaller the potential impacts.
Thank you.
The smaller the impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Osias, and thank you, Dr. Kincaid.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to just work out our plan. We clearly are going to need to come back tomorrow, although it looks like just tomorrow morning. So I think our attorneys for direct questions of Ms. Nelson and Dr. Kincaid are Mr. Wilkins and Mr. Brochard. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so and you haven't heard my questions yet. I'm going to go over them tonight and try to refine them a little bit. I probably have about an hour's worth of questions, although they're primarily just asking the witnesses to explain different points in their testimony. But understanding that may prompt some additional redirect. What do you have estimates for the amount of redirect, if any, at this point that you think you will have for these two witnesses? So I'll go first with you, Mr. Wilkins. Any estimate for your redirect for Ms. Nelson?
Not long, but there will be some redirect, meaning, yeah, well, I actually think it might be better to ask Ms. Nelson, because I only get to ask the questions, and the question then becomes how long it is to explain the answer to my questions. And we haven't actually discussed it yet, so, except for very briefly. So maybe Ms. Nelson might have a better guesstimate on how much time it would take to clarify a couple issues that we've discussed. Ms. Nelson, do you have any estimate on how long it might take to clarify some of these points?
I should be able to do that within about 10 minutes.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to guess, 10 to 15, but
All right, well, that sounds good. That's good. And for Mr. Burchard, do you plan to have redirect for Dr. Kincaid?
I think I might have a few questions for Dr. Kincaid. I say that mostly just to be cautious. I might have none.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like hours of redirect then.
no.
Good, okay. All right, so I don't think I have any schedule conflicts tomorrow, so we should be good. I really am going to try to, I hope we can wrap it up by noon tomorrow. Hopefully earlier. So I will start with my questions of these two witnesses, and I'm going to just sort of go back and forth because it'll go faster. And they may have some interaction as well. So I think that'll be more efficient. And then we'll do redirect, the brief redirect we've talked about. Hopefully, just from a time point of view, hopefully there won't need to be any follow-up questions after that, any recross. And then I would like to address exhibits. I assume MCWD will have several exhibits they'll want to offer into evidence. I'm not going to ask you to make a list of them now because I assume it's basically everything on your exhibit list that's not already been offered into evidence. So
It is, and so we have that list, so we've already created it.
Oh, okay. Well, we've posted an Excel spreadsheet with our list of what we think has been admitted and so forth. But if you have an exhibit, a file that shows what you're planning to offer tomorrow, and you can circulate that to me and everyone on the service list, that will probably facilitate Cal-Am's review of that so that they can decide if they have objections, and if so, be more prepared for those.
So what I can tell you, Mr. Lilly, is that we're introducing everything except for the two ASH slides that were supplemented. So every other exhibit that has not been already admitted that we have submitted, we will be moving to have admitted as evidence. So it's
Okay,
and
that's
so
what I figured. So that's fine. So if Cal-Am's on notice, and then we did receive an email, I think last week, from Mr. Betts regarding some remaining Cal-Am exhibits, plus there'll be some new ones. And the homework assignment for Cal-Am, it's 4:30 now. I hope you can do this. I hope it won't take very long. But if there were some fairly short excerpts from the depositions of Ms. Nelson and Dr. Kincaid, and I request that, which were used on CrossX. So Mr. Osias and company, if you can prepare one exhibit with the cover page and the pages of the transcript of Ms. Nelson's deposition that were either addressed or that you think need to come into evidence. If you can get that out either tonight or I'll just say tomorrow morning by 8:30, so we all have a chance, and just send it to the AHO email address with CCs to the service list, so there's not the delay for our having to post it. We will post it, but that way the other parties will get it right away. So one exhibit for the cover page and transcript pages for Ms. Nelson's deposition, and then another one for the cover page and transcript pages for Dr. Kincaid's deposition, if you want to introduce that. I think you said you did. And I think what we'll do is we'll just have those replace the prior exhibits, Kelly on 121 and 122, which were the entire depositions. I think, Mr. Osias, you had suggested that, and that seems like a good idea to me. So,
Mr. Lilly, I had one question about tomorrow morning having to do with questions and answers. And that is, we're going to get tomorrow morning, I guess, 2 new slides and hopefully some show your work backup.
yes.
And you want us to wait to ask questions about those since we really won't have any time to review them?
I would, well, let's see what they are. I'm hoping I can just ask a couple of questions and Dr. Kincaid can authenticate those. I'm hoping that will just take care of it. But I have to give you a right to ask follow-up questions if you think you need to. So I had forgotten about that, but thank you. So Dr. Kincaid, you and Mr. Brochard have your homework assignment. And
Yes, sir.
please try to get those by the same process to us by 8:30. I mean, again, these are fairly short, so I think if we have 30 minutes to review them, we ought to be able to get through them. And let's see where they are. I'm hoping he can authenticate them and we can be done with that. But Mr. Osias, if you think you need to have questions just for those, I'll decide whether to have you do that right away or whether to wait till the end.
Yes, I'm not, as you can imagine, given I agree with most of your comments almost all the time about this group. I'm not worried about it not being authentic. Or not work done by Dr. Kincaid. What I am worried about is whether I can instantly understand it.
Well,
And-
that may be a problem for me too. So we'll see. Let's take a look at it and we'll decide how to go forward.
Okay,
So, and we're not criticizing you, Dr. Kincaid. We're just pointing out we don't have your level of education on these issues. So thank you.
Oh, well, I'm just a hydrogeologist, so
Right.
I'm pretty sure you can figure it out. It's
Well,
mass balance.
we're just lawyers who think we know something about a lot of topics, and that's just enough to make us dangerous sometimes. So anyway, we'll all work our way through. So, okay, well, is there anything else for today, or can we just reconvene? Mr. Brochard, your real hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, I just had one other, we had a colloquy earlier about, I think Mr. Osias wanted a chance to provide rebuttal on the Monterey GSP model. And I would just ask if tomorrow morning they could just identify what parts of the testimony they expect to be rebutting so that we can really have a discussion as to whether that is proper rebuttal or not.
Okay, I think I
thought I did that today.
I mean, I don't want to hide the ball here. The reason I ask is because the 8600 number that Mr. Osias referenced, it's mentioned 3 times in Ms. Nelson's testimony, twice in her opening testimony, which they could have responded to in their rebuttal testimony, and then once in her rebuttal, I believe. Each time the question is simply a question about, is there a barrier to flow between the 2 subbasins? And the answer is no, and that's just one of the examples that's given as evidence that there's no barrier to flow. So that's the context in which it was stated. I don't know that anybody's actually disputing that there is no barrier to flow between these 2 subbasins.
Yeah, and the amount is primarily just to show that there's no rather than
Exactly.
So I don't know, Mr. Osias, I'm not sure that there's a need for a lot of rebuttal by Callion witnesses on that number. Am I missing something here from your point of view?
You are missing the part where the testimony or the GSP, I can't remember which right now at the end of the day, says it's a reasonably well-calibrated model that produced those numbers. And the comparison of that calibration to the criticized calibration here, where everybody is working on important projects and trying to get it right, I think is relevant for us to have a right to compare. And we haven't been given that.
Okay,
opportunity.
so I think I can help you all through this. I hope. I think the rebuttal is not to the 8,600 acre foot per year number. The rebuttal is to the part of MCWD's testimony that criticizes the calibration of the 2022 North Marina groundwater model. Is that correct, Mr. Osias?
Yes, and the calibration of the 2016 model.
Okay, all right, and the earlier model, and I've told you, I think our focus is going to be on the 2022 model because after all, that's the most recent version. So I think I hope that'll make it clear that we don't need to get bogged down into whether the 8,600 acre foot per year number is right or wrong and so forth, because that really hasn't been a major issue in this proceeding. But I do think Cal-Am's witnesses have a right, and I'm not saying I agree or not, but they have a right to make the argument that, hey, our calibration of our model was similar in quality, accuracy, and so forth as to the calibration done by the Monterey Subbasin GSA of its model. And, we'll see. And of course, Marina Coast, you're going to have a chance to respond to that. But let's make it clear, we're focusing on the calibration issue, not on the issue of the estimated amount of flow across that boundary between those two subbasins.
And so my answer is yes, except you did ask me, is it material if that number varies? And I honestly said, I didn't know until I could ask somebody.
Yeah,
So,
and that was my bad, which Mr. Brochard pointed out. For some reason, I'd gotten mixed up and I thought that was a boundary condition, but it clearly is not. And so I got off on the wrong track when I asked that question, and I apologize for that.
so I would suggest to you, if it's okay, that unless we tell you we think that number itself is also material, then it would be the focus on the calibration.
All right, thank you. I think that may help us get through. And if I'd been a little more focused and nimble when we had this discussion, I probably could have saved us a lot of discussion this earlier this afternoon. But anyway, I think that should make that clear, that that's where we are and so forth. So I don't know, Mr. Brochard, does that, of course, I know you're not going to agree on the arguments about calibration, but does that at least give you some idea of the issues that I think will be covered on rebuttal?
I mean, a little bit. It sounds like they want to use, if I'm correct, they want to use a model that was not built by Mr. Kincaid or Miss Nelson, that it was designed for a completely different purpose, and they want to use that to compare it to the calibration issues that have been raised as to the 2022 North Marina groundwater model. I'm not even sure if it's comparing apples to oranges.
Well, I don't know if it is or not, but I think your characterization is correct, and I will just sort of use the buzzwords. I think from what I heard from Mr. Osias, it's sort of like, well, is this level of calibration of the Cal-Am model within the industry standard for groundwater models in this area? So I think that's the way that comes up. But what you said is correct, but I think there is a potential relevance for rebuttal there on this, what I'll call the industry standard for calibration. So I hope that at least is somewhat clear. And I'm not saying whether or not that's ultimately going to be, decisive, but I think they probably are entitled to offer at least some limited evidence on the levels of calibration of other groundwater models that have been used in the area for making decisions. So that's where, think about it. And if you think I'm off base, you can respond at the appropriate time. You don't have to respond right now. I'm sort of hitting you with something new. So give that some thought, and you can think about that when we get into sort of rebuttal. But that's where I'm headed. I want to allow Sir rebuttal, but I want to try to reach closure on testimony here. Obviously, at some point we have to do that. So, okay. So I think we all have homework assignments. Maybe I should I'm going to write them down what I see. It's Cal-Am new exhibits are the depot transcript excerpts. So that's 2 exhibits, cover page and depot transcript excerpts for 2. For MCWD, it's Dr. Kincaid's 2 new slides. Explaining memo, I'll say explanatory memo. And related spreadsheet. Have I missed anything? Is that what the homework assignments are to get out by 8:30 tomorrow? Was there anything else?
I think it was 8:45 tomorrow, but I think that's it.
No, I said 8:30. I did not, I definitely said 8:30. At least I sure meant to. That half an hour is already going to be, I mean, these aren't long, but I want everybody to have them by 8:30. And these are all emailed to the, I'm sorry, Mr. Rochard, if I misspoke, just so we're clear, I meant 8:30.
That's fine.
And if you want to send them earlier, nobody's going to complain, but email them to our email inbox, which I get right away, and to everyone on the service list. And then we can all review them and move forward. And for the CalAm exhibits, you can go ahead and number those. I think the old numbers were 121 and 122. Mr. Betts, I think you were keeping track. Is that the right number?
I think you're correct, but if not, I understand the direction.
Good, that's the answer I like. Then they will replace the other ones. And then I did say for the new MCD, the 2 slides will be basically corrected slide and supplemental slide for exhibit. I think it was MCWD 118, with whatever Dr. Kincaid's slides were. And
Yes.
then the explanatory memo and related spreadsheet, just make those new exhibits in the MCWD exhibit numbering. So far, so good. All right, well, thank you all for your patience, perseverance, and putting up with me. And we were almost done, but Mr. Wilkins put up his hand. So go ahead, Mr. Wilkins.
Yes, sir. I just want to get a
Electronic
clarification.
and real hands. Go ahead.
Just a clarification for tomorrow morning. When we serve these at 8:30, generally for slides and exhibits, we upload them to the FTP site and we provide a notice to all parties that they've been uploaded. Now, that's the way my assistant does it. I assume tomorrow morning, all parties, in addition to giving notice that they've been uploaded, should send courtesy copies to all the parties of whatever they're uploading it for. Otherwise, people are going to say they didn't get it until they're moved over.
Okay, so what I said was you do not need to do the normal uploading. Just email it to the AHO email address and include everyone on the service list in the CC line. I'm hoping these files are small enough that you won't get bounce backs if you do that.
Okay, and so we don't need to upload them at all, just to be, I just want to make sure I'm totally clear on that. That's all I think.
No, it's good to be clear. And if for some
Mr.
reason you
Wilkins
get a bounce
and-
back, just send separate emails. It's possible with the slides, you'll need to do it with separate emails, but I'm hoping a file of a 1-page slide will go through on emails, so you won't need to do the upload.
So, Mr. Wilkins, I think, and Mr. Brochard, each of your secretaries, when they sent something out last time, misspelled my name, so I didn't get it. They wrote me nice apologies. But I ask you to have them not copy that old email address with the bad address in it and recreate it anew, please.
I'm just going to do it. So it'll be
Okay.
Oh, okay, well, and so thank you, Mr. Osias. While you're at that, I'm going to ask my staff, if they're listening, Ms. Blanc and Ms. Mullen, because we do have a Word file of a service list that we keep posted, which we ask you to use rather than using reply to all. But I will ask one of them to check and send you an email with the address we have, just to make sure you get it. This is going to be ex parte.
Yeah.
It's going to be, dear Mr. Osias, did you receive this email? And all you need to do is reply yes, if you received it.
I have not noticed any problem from the AHO. It was just from the last week.
Okay, so hopefully our service list is still good. And as I say,
Thank you.
we try to keep it up to date. And when in doubt, just download that Word file and then use that rather than using anything else, because that's our official service list. Okay, well, then we won't do that, Mr. Osias. If you're cool, you've gotten it. That my staff has plenty of other things to do. So
Okay.
pass on that. All right, so I think we've got it. Everybody have a good evening, and we will be back. We'll look for emails at 8:30 and we'll reconvene at 9 o'clock tomorrow. So have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Bye.